Hey folks, Roger here. A couple of folks suggested that I make a video touring my personal library and pointing out some books that are important to me that have been influential in my life. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to invite you into my home. I'll try to make this as short as possible, but I must say that with all these important books, trying to cram all of this into just a few minutes is sort of a crime against the history of thought. But I thought I'd just take a few minutes to share with you. First, two things. One, anyone who's known me for a long time knows that I have not always enjoyed reading at all. Growing up, I thought that books were a waste of time. I'd rather be outside fishing or playing video games or doing anything besides reading. Eventually it clicked for me that the reason that is because I could see the words on the page, I could read the words, I could get the facts out of the book, but I could not get the big ideas. I couldn't analyze the book very well. And so I wasn't really getting what books had to offer. But I've always been curious about the world, so I sort of just through sheer will kept studying, kept reading, realized I needed to get more books, and well, you're about to see the result of that. But something eventually clicked for me, and I was able to see what I could learn from books, and it's changed my life. So if you have a hard time reading, or you don't like to read, or you think reading is a waste of time, don't be hard on yourself. Don't be discouraged about that. Right? That's natural for most of us. But once you see what books have to offer, it's something I think that'll be interesting to you. The second thing I've noticed is that we, as modern folks, come into human history late in the game. Right? We think that we are the first to ask some of the questions that we ask, to make these discoveries. Right? I've discovered that's not the case. There's been an ongoing conversation about all the big questions that we ask for a very long time. A very, very long time. There's an ongoing discussion about what it means to be human, about morality, about God, about Scripture, about really our place in society. What kind of government should we have? Any of the big questions that we have, they've been asked and discussed for a long time. We come into that discussion very late. So what I've found is helpful is to humble myself and to back up and see what older voices have said about all of these big questions, right? So these books that I'm about to show you, they're not a waste of time. They put us in context. They put our conversations in context. Now, when I read older voices like Aristotle or Cicero or older thinkers, I don't have to agree with them all, but they help me to see and understand the conversation that we're coming into. So they put our cultural context into context. I hope that makes sense to you. Eventually, I concluded that I'm confident that Christianity is true. And reading older Christian voices has enriched my Christian faith just as much as reading older thinkers has enriched my thinking. So hope you'll tag along for just a few minutes. I'll try to make this quick. Eventually, I'll make a recommended reading list for various topics that you might be interested in, some things I think you just really need to read to be well-versed in that topic. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just someone who's curious and has kind of dug in for a while. So, all right, let's get to it. These are my books, at least most of them. I've got some more on a nook, and I've hidden my nerdy books upstairs so you can't see my comic book collection, but here's my desk. Get to hang out with old Captain Picard, gnome. Here are some books on language studies so I can study the New Testament. Some books I'm currently reading for a class. Some of the books I'm trying to read on my own as I have time. But just to give you an overview, this is the bulk of my bookcases. I got these at Target. They're pretty cheap, right? They look nice, but they're not that expensive. I tried to organize my books both topically and semi-chronologically. It's not flawless, but it's worked for me. So let's just kind of jump in, and you'll see that this discussion, this ongoing conversation that I've mentioned, you'll sort of see how it plays out here. All right, so first off, we have my theology section. And up top here we have a set of the early Christian writings, the early church fathers, from those who came very shortly after the time of Christ up through Augustine, into the time of Constantine through the Council of Nicaea. So this has been helpful for me because I can see how Christianity has developed and changed, what the early Christians thought about whatever topic that we debate today or discuss today. I can see what they said about it. Any controversial topic in Christianity or in culture, I have a little bit more of the context there, so that's been very helpful to me. I'll likely never read them all, but several of the books have been very helpful. I would say that to understand Western culture, you should certainly know something about Augustine. Moving on, we could say lots about that, but just for sake of time, more theology. Here are some books that are about the textual evidence behind the New Testament, discussing various doctrines. Here is a great systematic theology book. So if you're a Christian and you want a solid systematic theology, this is a great one by Dr. Norman Geisler. I can't say I agree with everything in it, but it's still a phenomenal work. If I could recommend one systematic theology book, it would likely be this one. If you want to know something about how Christian thought has developed through time, I would like to recommend this book by Dr. Alistair McGrath of Oxford University. If you don't have time to read all of this, who does, right? Well, he breaks it down for you. He gives you the key passages, and he discusses it in a survey form, so you can see how this thought has developed and played out through time. Fascinating and very helpful, especially for the Christian. Lots of good stuff there, but we'll keep going. Here I have more from theology. Here are the works of Jonathan Edwards. Certainly a fascinating character in America's rich religious heritage. The fundamentals. These are the earliest fundamentalist writings. A friend got these for me years ago, and it's helpful because you can even put fundamentalism in its context and see what they thought back then and see that fundamentalism perhaps has changed a bit today. On that point, the works of Benjamin B. Warfield, an early fundamentalist thinker. He was high up in academia, a very smart, intelligent guy. And some of his ideas would probably be controversial today, but certainly a man I respect and he's worth reading. Some Charles Spurgeon. More theology from various perspectives, from fundamentalist to evangelical to liberal theology. All kinds of good stuff there. Bible commentaries, Matthew Henry. Baxter's Explore the Book. It's a good survey. Some young earth creationist books down there. And you can kind of see some, I think, 1960s young earth creationist writings down there. I've got more elsewhere, but those are some of them. More theology and apologetics. These, lots of layman's apologetics. So if you're a Christian and you want to learn more about how to defend your faith, or if you're not a Christian, you want to understand a little bit more about why Christians believe what they do, there are good books written on the layman's level, and I'll recommend one to you. But I want to say, if you're a Christian or if you're a skeptic and you're not satisfied with the layman's book, look in the bibliography and get some of the more scholarly works and dig a little deeper. That's what I had to do, and it was immensely helpful. But if you need a good survey book, I'd recommend Intellectuals Don't Need God and Other Modern Myths by Alistair McGrath. He's an Oxford professor who became a Christian, formerly an atheist, and he just takes arguments for Christianity and breaks them down into layman's level, and he takes arguments against Christianity and he discusses those. So it's just a helpful and honest discussion of these important topics. Here's a book that was, I can't say that you may not have time to read it, it's long, but this book was very helpful to me in studying the life of Jesus of Nazareth from a Christian perspective, but a very scholarly work. It's exhaustive and exhausting, but it was very helpful. All right, moving along. So that's my theology section. Moving on to history. I've got a survey of Western history here. This is a survey by Susan Wise Bauer. She's very popular in the homeschool movement. She teaches here in Virginia at a university, but she's, I think, moderately conservative. But she's got an interesting perspective here. She goes through history chronologically, but she'll take various places in the world and try to discuss them, so you see what's happening at that moment in time around the world. So while the ancient Greeks are doing this, she'll jump over here and then say, well, while they're doing that, the Persians are doing this, the Egyptians are doing this. So that's a good survey of history, I think. And someone recommended that to me, and it's been pretty solid. Here's my friend Homer, the poet. He doesn't know where he's looking. He's blind. We're over here, buddy. And my other friend Homer, he's always excited. Getting into the Greek writings, we've got some Greek histories. Thucydides, I think any man would do well to read Thucydides and his writings about the Greek wars. It's good stuff. Herodotus, the writings of Homer. Moving on, Robert Graves is a British poet who, if you don't have time to really dig into Greek mythology, I found his stuff to be a good summary of Greek mythology, good entry. Some other interesting books from history. Some of these have been banned at times in history, but Lucretius, the materialist poet. If you are interested in studying atheism, you can put aside Dawkins and read some Lucretius. It'd be good for you. Some more books from a liberal theology perspective about the New Testament, a skeptical position on the New Testament. Another Outline of Human History by H.G. Wells, certainly from a very different perspective than the traditional perspective of history. Just very skeptical, but it's from the modern period. So some works on the Crusades and various works from ancient history. Tacitus, Josephus, Julius Caesar, Marcus Aurelius. Some of this is philosophy, but lots of good stuff. The Aeneid, that's worth at least looking up on Wikipedia. It's a book about Roman identity and Roman nationalism, so it's very worthwhile to at least know something about the Aeneid, which builds on Homer. Moving on, more works from ancient history, the Nag Hammadi Library, English history, Russian history, my home state of Mississippi. At least I spent several years there. So books on ancient creation myths from various perspectives. I have some from Egypt, Babylon, and some books from Sumeria that discuss Sumerian mythology and that discuss Genesis from a scholarly perspective. And that's fascinating. Moving on, physics. Lots of good stuff here. Einstein's Relativity, some Feynman. I want to say this book by Hawking, this isn't a book he wrote, but it's a book he compiled. And it's got some of the big texts from history on physics, from Copernicus and Galileo to Newton. These are just some things that you want to have some kind of rudimentary understanding of to understand how we got where we are now. This is a great book if you want to go a little bit deeper. Some of this is beyond me, I won't lie, but this is a colleague of Stephen Hawking. He's written an excellent book on some physics and theoretical physics. Now we get to philosophy. Here is a survey set of philosophy that I found very helpful. It's written by Frederick Copleston. He's been gone for a while now, but he's from a Christian/Catholic perspective. But I found it to be fairly objective and an excellent discussion of history, the history of thought, Western thought, from the ancient Greeks all the way through the modern period into the early postmodern period. And I got these books very cheap, very inexpensively on thrift books for about $3 a piece because I'm cheap. Plato, you gotta know something about Plato. You see some of these books from Aristotle are missing because I'm reading them elsewhere. This is a book from this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, an Enlightenment thinker. I told my son to go get a book for bedtime story, and he grabbed this, brought to me. I'm sure it would have put him to sleep. All right, more from really Western thought here. The beginnings of Western science through Aquinas. Everyone should know something about Aquinas. He's so far removed from us culturally and that his ideas might seem bizarre at first, but he's definitely worth the effort to understand. Dante, some political theory, moving into the modern period from Thomas Hobbes, Descartes, Kant, even Marx here. Some of these books are out of place, but Tolkien's translation of Beowulf is fantastic. I read that in my grad program some time ago. All right, various works of philosophy here and history from English literature, Eusebius Bede. These are early Brits who wrote about King Alfred and the early British period. It's good to know about that stuff and how Britain came to be a nation after the Roman period. Here are books about the philosophy of mind, philosophy of knowledge, philosophy of speech, Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is the first philosophy book I ever purchased. Bought it back in college. The first one I bought that I didn't have to buy. and he's the first American philosopher. He came up with the first originally American philosophy called pragmatism. Now, he's not the most brilliant thinker. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's certainly an interesting read about pragmatism and the varieties of religious experience. And he's worth knowing something about. And that launched me on a journey. He was writing about things I knew I didn't know anything about. And to understand what he was saying, I had to understand about some of these voices from the past we've discussed. But that book right there was sort of a catalyst in my life. All right, books from around the world. I've got some Hindu books, some books from Buddhism and Islam, and various other perspectives, really, even the Book of Mormon down there. What do Christians believe in common with Muslims? On what points do Christians and Muslims strongly disagree? What beliefs are compatible, what beliefs are incompatible? There are some of both, and those are things that are good to think about. Moving into, well, some literature, some more philosophy. Sigmund Freud, not that great. Moving into the American period. Now, after we have the ancient philosophers, the medieval philosophers, and the scholastics, we move into really the Enlightenment period, where much of this is starting to be either rejected or questioned or challenged or reshaped. Some of it for the better, I think, and some of it not so much. And I could say all kinds of stuff about these books, but if you are an American, you need to know something about John Locke. You need to read something about his second treatise of civil government. His ideas, built upon natural law, shaped our founding to such an extent that we would have been a much different nation without his ideas. Now, he didn't come up with them on his own. He brought the idea from natural law he got from Aquinas back in the medieval period, who was incorporating ideas from Aristotle and Christian scripture, and those ideas influenced our own nation. A lot could be said there. Tocqueville's Democracy in America, certainly worth reading, Volume 2, for the thinking American. Also, the Federalist Papers. If you're an American, you need to know something about James Madison, especially. His ideas, he's contributed phenomenally to world thought from an American's perspective. And also, the Anti-Federalist Papers. We often think of our founding fathers as being this, this monolithic thought where they all agreed about everything. Well, they didn't. Some of their ideas were so different that it eventually, where they could not reconcile them, led to a war. Lots by Jefferson here that's good. The Life of Frederick Douglass. If you want to understand the free market models, you hear debates about economics all the time now. Know something about Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. This is sort of the Bible for the free market model. I have not read all of this, but I got on Yale's YouTube page and found out what the Yale students read. I read that plus some, and listened to some lectures and read some literature about that. Extremely influential on the American and now really broader Western models of economics. Lots of good stuff here. Books on the history of the Supreme Court, religious liberty, and dealing with the ideas that we're struggling with now, that we're debating now. Here's a section on C.S. Lewis. The more I come to understand world thought, the more I come to respect Lewis as a thinker and for what he was trying to do. I likely would not have said that a few years ago. Here are some Harvard classics. Very expensive, very nice, but I got these cheap at a library sale for about $3 a piece. From the founder of Pennsylvania, William Penn, to Franklin, to Francis Bacon, to Milton. All kinds of good stuff in there. Edmund Burke. If you're a thinking American, you should know something about Edmund Burke. He could be considered the founder of modern conservatism. Now, he debated with Thomas Paine, and I would not agree with him on everything, perhaps the monarchy, but he's certainly worth knowing something about. His ideas about society and about human nature, I think, need to be revisited, and they are being revisited by modern conservative British philosopher Roger Scruton. Some poetry, some classics. G.K. Chesterton. I have not read all of these. Some of the letters of Lewis. I've not read all these. I hope to one day, but some of these are lengthy. The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. His life was threatened by certain Muslims because his work was seen as blasphemous, but the American singer Cat Stevens, who converted to Islam, actually supported killing Salman Rushdie. I hope he's gotten over that. My section on atheism, from various periods, but mostly the new atheists here. Dawkins, Hitchens, some Carl Sagan. A little bit more academic atheism by the late Michael Martin, The Case Against Christianity. That one tore me up a little bit for a while there. Now, if you want to read a real atheist, I would recommend Bertrand Russell, who tried to, since he rejected Christianity, he tried to come up with his own philosophy of happiness. Here's a book by his daughter, who knew him well, who suggested that perhaps he wasn't that happy after all. Nietzsche. So, when we see all of this discussion about human nature, about morality, the state, natural law, this guy turned it all on its head. That's not an exaggeration. He took God out of the equation of the Western system of morality, which he knew was tied to Christianity. And he said, who is brave enough to understand morality for what it is? Come with me, I'll show you, if you're brave enough. And show us he did. And Western thinking on human nature and morality and the society has been radically on its head ever since. Radically challenged. In fact, he rejected the natural law of Locke and others, Aquinas. So, in modern America, how do we justify the idea of human rights? Well, some would turn to John Rawls and his modern theory of justice. And this is where a lot of Democrats would get some of their ideas from. This is not a justification of human rights based on natural law, based on our nature, which is created in God's image. This is a very different way to try to get to natural right, or to rights, based on, and it leads to, and is based on partly social equality, rather than intrinsic moral worth and the natural rights that are an outcome of our nature. So it's a very different way of thinking, trying to get to a similar conclusion from a different foundation. I don't think it works, but it's what a lot of folks try to do, and that's where the Democrats come from often. Modern Offenses of Natural Law from Robert George. And so there's that. Now we move into, you see all this discussion as I've mentioned before, but all these topics, everything you can imagine. So having that in my mind, I come to the contemporary period. And so when I read about political events by American foreign policy advisors, Samantha Powers or Brent Snowcroft, or U.S. presidents or people in authority, or modern political thinking, I have all this background in my mind, right? If you want to know something about the way they think the world is shaping up, either journalists or political analysts, intelligence experts, you can buy their books or read them on YouTube. Much better than getting it from a rather biased news site. This is just the contemporary discussion about culture from a Christian perspective or an atheist perspective, or various political perspectives. Why folks went conservative. More political philosophy and thoughts about all kinds of good stuff going on today. Roger Scruton, I mentioned him before, but he's a man worth checking out if you want to understand conservatism. Books by some political thought, political thinkers. Some Egyptian literature. Economics. Now, if you want to understand traditional free market economics, again, I'd recommend knowing something about Adam Smith, but also Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman. They're good to know. If you want to understand where the Democrats are coming from, they're not all Marxists. You would do well to learn something about John Maynard Keynes, A General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. He influenced President Roosevelt and other Democratic presidents like President Obama and President Clinton. Now, because the traditional understanding of human nature has been sort of discarded or challenged at best. Where are we going now? Well, there's the postmodern thinking of human nature, human sexuality, human morality. Jean-Paul Sartre, Foucault, back to Nietzsche. I don't think he would like what they've done, but they built on his work. And the transgender movement, the third wave feminist movement, lots of books by feminists and transgender theorists and such. And Islam. What do we do with Islam in the West? There are Muslim thinkers in the West trying to reform Islam to fit in better to the West. There are others who are trying to say, let's call Islam for the violent thing we think it is. And there are others who are trying to say, well, it's always been spectacular. What are you talking about? So there are some various perspectives there. So I hope you can see that when I come to the issues today, I just have the broader context in mind. And all of this informs me about the contemporary voices. So when I hear the voices from today, I also bear in mind the voices from the past. And that enlightens my thought. I also want to point out, too, this is my favorite Bible. This was given to me as a gift in college by my in-laws, my wife's parents. This was the Cadillac of Bibles back in the day. It's a Cambridge King James translation, and it was just one of the best gifts I've ever gotten. It's spectacular. Thanks for joining me on my tour of my library. The video got a little longer than I anticipated, but there are so many good books we could have discussed for hours at a time on any of these books, really. But if you are interested in starting a library, or you just want to kind of get into reading because you know you need to think a little bit differently about things, here are just a few things that have helped me. We're all busy, so what's helped me is, one, set aside time dedicated to serious reading. You have to turn off the Xbox, turn off Facebook, turn off the television, put aside distractions, and pick up a serious book and dedicate time to that. You may have to schedule that time because your time will be taken from you if you don't. That's been my experience. So make sure that you set that aside that time to read. Two, read meaningful things. Don't. Our generation seems to think on the surface of things. We like to get sound bites and memes and just sort of the quick, already pre-digested version of things. And so when we have all these debates on the internet about economics or feminism or whatever, it's not the full version. We want the candy version, right? Set aside all that and read something meaningful. If you understand, the context of all these discussions, when you come to that particular topic, you can put it in its context and you see the full picture. Eventually, I would like to make a recommended reading list for whatever topic that is important. For example, feminism or natural law or Christian apologetics or whatnot, you name it. And have a recommended reading list. This is a sort of a mandatory text that you should read for this. And then have a supplementary reading list as well, just for those who are interested. I can't promise you when that'll happen because I'm fairly busy, but that might help some of you. But read something meaningful. And the third thing I want to say is, don't get discouraged. I cannot tell you how many times I've picked up a book that was beyond me. Not a waste of a time book, but a book that I knew was important, that influenced somebody who changed the world. And this book is important, but it was not easy. And I'd stare at the pages and I could read the words, but I just couldn't pull it out. It was beyond me. So what I had to do was I had to elevate my mind to the level of the book. That takes work. It's not easy. But don't get discouraged in that. If you pick up a book and you say, man, this is beyond me, that does not mean that you're stupid. It means that you have to expand yourself a bit. But it's worth it. What I've discovered is anything in life worth having is worth work. That's true with ideas, to fully grasp them, or the great books. So what are some books I'd recommend? Well, too many to list here, but just a few. Depends on what topic you would like to know, but some things that are very relevant. I would recommend Aristotle's Metaphysics. It's a book that'll seem bizarre to you the first time you read it. It's just so far removed from us, but it's highly worth the read. To understand a lot of the history of thought, you have to understand something about Aristotle's thought. He just influenced too much. If you're an American, I'd highly recommend, again, John Locke. I'd recommend to you his second treatise of civil government. That's highly worth some time. I'd further recommend Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Lots of topics, lots of books we could recommend, but those are highly worth your time, whoever you are. And I want to say this as well. This sounds cliche, but I mean it in a serious way. Read the Bible as an adult. So we have this sort of stereotype of the Bible, and we go to Sunday school as kids, and we learn the Bible stories, and we become adult, and we become skeptical, and we go through all this process of, do we really believe this? What do we do with this? Dedicate some time, get a good Bible, and read it as an adult. It's not an easy read. There are different types of books inside of that book. And it's work. You're going to get stuck on some of the passages in the Old Testament, like the genealogies. You're going to get stuck on those types of passages. You might get stuck or struggle with some of the things that are just so foreign and bizarre to us, or some of the violent things that happen in the Old Testament. But be honest with it. Don't gloss over it because you don't like it, or judge it harshly because you don't like it. Just be honest with what it is. Take those ideas, work through them, but don't stop. Keep going until you finish. You'll not understand all of it, but it's going to be highly worth your time. The Bible, whether you're an atheist, a Christian, a Buddhist, so you name it, the Bible has influenced the world. And I would challenge you and suggest to you that you take some time to read it. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour of my library. I appreciate you coming into my home and spending some time with me. And I hope to see you here again. God bless. Have a good day.